Welcome back to the Gentleman's Gazette. In today's video, we discuss 3 iconic suit styles and silhouettes. The Italian one, the English one, and how they compare to the American one. Obviously, there are many other tailoring schools, including the French, the Austrian, and the German schools, but the video would just be too long if we covered them all. So why did we choose these 3? Well, we're in America, and if you ask John Doe on the street where a proper suit should be made, chances are they'll say Italy or England. So how do the Italian, the English, and the American school of tailoring compare? Well, there are certain broad strokes, but a suit from Milan is different from a suit from Rome than it is from, let's say, Sicily or Naples. The same is true for English suits, maybe in a less extreme version. A suit from Savile Row is very distinctly British. A suit from Manchester or Dover is probably not as refined and just a little different in the way it looks. While the tailoring industry in the US is nowadays limited to a few centers where they're still made, you can still have the classic sack suit style as popularized by Brooks Brothers. Of course, suits often contain hybrid elements and different varieties, but we'll try to shed some light onto them so you can clearly see if a suit is Italian, English, or American. Of course, let's not forget that the suit by Giorgio Armani from the 80s or 90s looks very different from an Italian suit today. In order to really understand the differences between the suit style silhouettes, it's important to understand the history of the suit. So let's take a quick look at that. Western suit tailoring, as we know it today, has its origins in Great Britain, more specifically 19th century London. Also, the Japanese word for suit is Savile Row, which is their pronunciation of Savile Row. If we had to bring back the suit to just one person, it would likely be Beau Brummel, who was a dandy in 19th century London. Before him, men wore very colorful outfits, but he wanted to remove excess and volume and brought down the color spectrum to black. So that meant no more powdered wigs, frills, brocade silks, and heels. Yes, before Beau Brummel, men would wear pretty much high heels. While Beau Brummel was a big proponent of black for evening wear, for day wear, his uniform looked slightly different. Often he would be seen wearing a dark blue coat, a white shirt paired with a buff vest, fawn trousers, and black boots. To top it all off, he took a lot of time to tie his bow tie in a way that it looked very effortless. Literally, he spent hours to make it look like it was just put on in less than a minute. He was the one advocating for a close-fitting cut, which would eventually transition into the so-called lounge suit. Obviously, when we think of a lounge today, we have something casual in mind. Back then, what we now know as a regular suit was a quite informal, casual garment, hence the word lounge suit. To learn more about the dress code and the backstory, check out this video here. How did Beau Brummel come up with his clothes designs? Basically, they date back to the uniforms he wore at Eton and as a cavalry officer. By the mid-1800s, famous Savile Row tailor Henry Poole removed the tails from an evening tailcoat, thus making it into a tuxedo jacket. To learn all you ever wanted to know about black tie history, please check out our in-depth black tie guide here. Once the lounge suit had been established as a garment men could wear, it took on a different characteristic and development in each of the different countries, which is why we have those distinctly different suit styles we know today. A classic British suit accentuates the physique of the wearer and communicates authority. It basically is a cavalry officer's outfit made for civilians. I'd say a strong structure with stiff interlining that is more military uniform inspired is the hallmark of a British suit. That means padded shoulder, a stiffer canvas, as well as some waist suppression. Everything is properly fitting without looking too tight. Now that being said, not all famous English tailors are alike. Companies like Anderson & Shepherd or Stephen Hitchcock specialize in the soft cut drape style, which is characterized by no or very minimal shoulder padding, a very soft sweater-like canvas feel, and a drape cut that leaves more fullness of your shoulders and your chest. To learn more about drape and what it means, check out this guide here. Even though Great Britain is an island, and thus they have more moderate temperatures, it can be quite cool because of all the rain they experience. Because of that, the traditional English suit uses heavier fabrics. Now with a weight of 13 ounces or more, you don't just get warmth, but also a nicer drape that hides any kind of possible flaws. It's much easier to tailor a heavier fabric than it is to tailor something that is very lightweight because it wrinkles a lot more easily. To this day, English mills generally tend to have heavier worsteds, flannels, or tweed fabrics that are still made up into suits. Of course, finishing and weaving technology has come a long way, so overall the weights have gone down. The look of an English suit can generally be described as conservative and understated, which is in line with their culture of following the rules. More specifically, that means the lapels are not particularly wide or have a particularly high gorge. The buttonhole is not very visible, and you don't see 2 rows of pick stitching along the edges of every seam. Another typical element for British suits are flap pockets, which have an equestrian heritage. Of course, for double-breasted suits, which are traditionally more formal than single-breasted suits, oftentimes you will not see the flap, which makes a suit slightly more casual. Also, the ticket pocket, just located above one of the pockets, either on the right or on the left, depending on your dominant hand, is a very characteristic British feature. In the 30s, most English suits would not have featured a vent because a ventless suit jacket was the most closed-fitting and elegant. On the other hand, today most English suits have side vents because they have somewhat been established as the norm, so you can still put your hands in your pocket, all the while covering your rear. In the 90s, surgeon cuffs or working buttonholes on your cuffs were a distinctly British hallmark. Today you can go to H&M and find a suit that has that feature, so I wouldn't describe it as quintessentially British anymore. The gorge of an English suit, which is that little seam between the collar and the lapel, is typically lower than on more modern Italian suits. Now, to learn more about suit terminology in general, please check out this in-depth guide here. The front quarters of an English suit jacket are generally more straight cut and less open than, let's say, an Italian jacket. Some people say a British suit looks best on slim men, but I would say if you have it tailored, you can be a little more portly and it will still look splendid if you like a more dominant, authoritative look. It's also more defined by its proportions and the clean lines rather than showy details, and as such, it is known as the perfect suit for a workplace. Of course, these are just broad generalizations, and every tailoring house has their own individual unique style that is slightly different than what you'd find elsewhere. Rather than trying to get the tailor to change his house style to your needs, it's best to find someone who is as close to your ideal style as possible. In the 20s and 30s, the British drape cut was invented on Savile Row, and if you like that style, then by all means go to Anderson & Shepherd or Stephen Hitchcock, who specialize in that. Dijon Skinner, on the other hand, wouldn't be the first address for this kind of style. In some ways, a draped suit is an antithesis to the classic British suit because there's so much excess fabric. You still have the waist suppression, and it helps to cut an athletic figure. However, it's almost exaggerated because you have more excess fabric over the chest and shoulder blades. Next, let's look at the Italian suit. Italy is one of those countries where a lot of small towns still have actual bespoke tailors. The craft and the traditions developed long before the internet, and with long distances, communication was more difficult, and so different styles evolved in different towns and parts of the country. So while a style of a Milanese suit in northern Italy, where things are more industrial and the economy is stronger, are much closer to the English suit than, let's say, in Naples, where it gets very hot and everything is a bit more casual. With the general casualization of menswear in recent decades, paired with an increased appreciation in craftsmanship, the Neapolitan tailoring school has become increasingly popular in recent years. It is certainly unique from the other tailoring schools, and it all starts with the shoulder. Today's Neapolitan jackets all lack shoulder padding. That being said, older Neapolitan jackets had shoulder padding as well. When you sew on a pair of sleeves, there are basically 3 options to fold the fabric ends. You can fold both towards the shoulder, both towards the sleeve, or you can split them up. With the so-called spalla camicia, the shirt shoulder, both seams are folded towards the shoulder. Typically what happens in Naples, you also get a wavy-like structure where the fabric is sewn closely together, giving you the effect of multiple dimples next to each other. While that would look out of place on an English suit, it is definitely a hallmark of a Neapolitan spallacamicia. Now, a slightly more formal Italian shoulder style is the con rollino. In that case, both seams are folded towards the sleeve, and you have an additional piece of fabric that makes the whole sleeve come up more, and it has a nice pagoda-like shoulder that raises up and then falls down like a waterfall. Some people also call it a roped shoulder with a roping detail, and typically you can't find any dimple-like waves or grinze up there. Now I'm sure if you find the right Neapolitan tailor, they'll probably also create different shoulder constructions for you. Nevertheless, these are today the most characteristic shoulder constructions you can find in southern Italy. Other Neapolitan suit features include patch pockets, which are a little more casual. They also often come single-breasted in a 3-roll tool configuration, meaning the top button is never buttoned and just rolled into part of the lapel. The chest pocket is typically rounded and called barchetta, which means as much as little boat. The front quarters are more open. The canvas is very lightweight or sometimes completely absent, which makes sense in a warmer climate where more airflow is desirable. Of course, the fabrics are also lighter in weight and they're often blended. It's not just pure wool, and the weave is usually also more open so you can feel the breeze. The uniform standard for vents is definitely a double vent. Also, if you look at the fine pick stitching that typically on an English suit is more on the lapel, can be found throughout all the seams. Sometimes you even have a second row of pick stitching that is tailored in a way so it's clearly visible, sometimes with a slightly contrasting thread. In England, on the other hand, they would make it so it's hardly visible in a perfectly matching thread. Overall, the Neapolitan tailoring features show there's a bit more flamboyance in Italian suit style. Now, in a world that gets increasingly more casual, I've seen many London businessmen now wear Neapolitan suits because wearing a suit still makes you more formal than 90% of the men out there. Of course, some may argue that a Neapolitan suit is not appropriate for really formal offices, but in this day and age, you can probably still get away with a Neapolitan navy suit in a rather formal law firm. The physical structure, the look, and the details reflects the southern Italian, warmer environment of Naples much better than, let's say, the more stiffer, upper lip, rainy English environment. Now, if you look at Roman suit styling, it's probably what most people in the world first recognized as an Italian suit in the 1950s. Designed by the Roman tailoring house Brioni, they really were the first to scale up this style and sell it to the world as the classic Italian suit style. It generally had a slim fit, a bit of shoulder padding, and since Rome is further north from Naples, it was also a bit more conservative. That meant no patch pockets, but jetted pockets. That meant no rear vent for a clean silhouette. Also, the lapels were a bit more Milanese in the sense that everything was more conservative, and a 3-roll 2 wasn't a thing for them. You would often find a 2-button jacket when it was single-breasted. A classic Milanese suit emphasizes the shoulder in a way that doesn't necessarily rely on padding. In general, the gorge was lower, lapels were maybe a little wider, and overall, it was a perfectly wearable business suit that maybe was a bit more flamboyant in the fabric choice than a classic British suit. Of course, keep in mind that with the internet and globalization, you can now very easily find tailors in Milan that make you a suit that is very Neapolitan and vice versa. Also, bear in mind that these are just general guidelines that may change over time, because if you look at tailoring or menswear books from the 80s, Italian style is often characterized as being heavily padded, like the ones from Giorgio Armani in the 90s, versus American suits are characterized as having no shoulder pad at all. But if you look at it today, it's almost reversed. And when it comes to the American suit style, they're generally not known as the most sophisticatedly elegant garments. Even though the US had many immigrants, including people from Great Britain or Italy, probably the English suit style was more prevalent and adapted in the 20s, particularly by Brooks Brothers, who then introduced the so-called sack suit. It was characterized by a jacket front that was lacking a dart. Because of that, there was less waist suppression, and the whole garment looked more like a sack, which is usually not very flattering. So the sack suit didn't just have straight cut jacket panels that didn't pay any attention to contours, but the trousers were also really full cut. The term sack was meant to recall the French sac jacket from the 1840s, which was cut from two straight panels. However, most people associated more the look of a potato sack, and it became kind of a negative observation of a suit that just didn't fit you at all. In typical American fashion, the sack suit was developed for marketing or business purposes in the sense that one suit would fit them all, thus bringing the cost per suit way down. Brooks Brothers wanted something that was cheap to manufacture and cheap to replace. It also featured a single bend, had no working sleeve buttons or other noticeable details. Because of that, the armholes were also cut rather deep, so every man, no matter how big or slim they were, could fit into it. Ironically, a sack suit became a staple of the Ivy style look, and by the way, you can learn more about that style in this video here. It basically helped the young men to visually rebel against their fathers and their suit ideas. So, which suit style is best? Obviously, that is a very subjective question. Personally, I think there are interesting elements in all of them, and I often like to mix them and not just use one of them. I like to have the typical British pinstripe suit that is businesslike, but maybe have a slightly softer canvas because overall I like softer canvas suits. Sometimes though, having a really heavy padded canvas that makes you look like a cavalry officer is desirable too. I don't think you have to just pick one thing and just wear that, but you can develop your own style. Let's say for me, I have bigger thighs, so I don't wear skinny pants. I have fuller cut pants with double pleats. Not something that's in style right now. I'm sure it will be again in a few years from now, but for me it doesn't matter because I've found my style. That being said, the classic American sack suit is probably the least favorite because I don't think it flatters me. Now, at the end of the day, the most important aspect of a suit, no matter whether it's English, Italian, or American, is its fit. And to learn how a suit should fit you properly, please check out our series here. Also, take into consideration your personal circumstances. If you work in an office 5 or 6 days a week, then by all means, maybe start with some British-style suits, get the basics in navy, charcoal, and stripes, and then maybe elaborate and get some more Italian-influenced sport coats. On the other hand, if you live in a more casual environment where it's warm, then you're much better off with a southern Italian-style garment that maybe has linen or silk blended into the fabric that is more airy and maybe has no lining and just makes you more comfortable and more fit in, all the while not looking sloppy. If you're on a shorter side, an Italian style that has a slightly shorter jacket with a higher gorge may give you the appearance of height. By the way, if you want to know how to look taller as a shorter man in a suit, check out this video here. Let's say you're very thin built, you're very slim, and an Italian suit will just accentuate your slimness. In that case, I'd suggest you try out a British silhouette, which just makes you look a little more substantial and more balanced. At the end of the day, what a good suit will always do is take features that are asymmetrical in your body and balance them out so it looks overall harmonious. If you're interested in a more youthful, casual look, definitely go with an Italian style. If you want something a little more seasoned and mature, go with a British style. So what are features that I like? I appreciate different shoulder constructions for different kinds of jackets. I like a softer jacket. I like smaller armholes that allow me to move very easily. I like heavier fabrics on suits sometimes, but I also like lighter weight fabrics. I'm 6 foot tall, I have bigger thighs, so the typical modern Italian silhouette is maybe not the best look for me. I'm also a big fan of vintage garments for things like overcoats, or sometimes also for suits. I also live in a climate with 4 distinct seasons where summers are really warm, the winters are really cold, and we have nice fall and spring weather. Because of that, I can wear a different range of suits. I can have seersucker suits and fresco ones in the summer, real heavy flannel and worsted suits in the winter. And in between, I can wear 3 season weights or all season weights, and it just allows me to play more with my wardrobe. So for today's video, I intentionally picked a suit that was British, but was not your typical British suit. For example, it has this heavy herringbone fabric, which is typically British, but the pattern and the color is in a brown that is typically a little more casual and not so British. Also, it has a 3-roll-2 silhouette, which is more casual and probably Neapolitan, especially if you look at the patch pockets and the front dart that goes all the way to the bottom of the seam. Then again, if you look at the lapels and the gorge, it's a much more British lapel. Look at the rear, there's no vent, which again is not something you'd find in a Neapolitan jacket, but more in a jacket from the 1930s. The pants have cuffs or turn-ups, are full cut to accommodate my roomy thighs. And it is in fact a vintage English suit that I found at a store during a trip to London. I just like the mixing and matching of the material with those certain details that is usually not something you can just find these days. So I paired the suit with a white double-cuffed dress shirt and a British wool chalet tie that has tones of yellow, green, red, and blue. You can find it in our shop here, just like the green and red pockets were that picks up the color of the ties. I pair it with a phlox boutonniere because it has white like my shirt and yellow like my tie. My cufflinks are eagle claw malachite cufflinks that pick up the green colors in the pocket square as well as the tie. I chose a silver metal because it matches my belt buckle, and the leather color of the belt matches my shoes, which are chocolate brown suede half chukka boots from Loke. I transitioned them to my pants with a pair of shadow striped dark brown and beige socks, so everything is harmonious and works well together. Again, you can find them in our shop here just like the other accessories.